Hello there, little masters, and welcome, as always, to the Prancing Pony Podcast, where we're serving up good stuff that would even ease the tension at a Noldor family reunion.
And we're going to need a lot of it for this episode.
You're telling me.
Westu Hall, my friends. I'm Sean Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and as always, I'm joined by the man of the West, the Aragorn to my Ymir, Alan Sisto.
Thank you, Sean. And yes, we will, because tonight we cover the last few pages of Chapter 13 of The Return of the Noldor. And the first thing up is the Feast of Reuniting. Fëanor's dead, and all the Noldor are going to start getting along now. Right? Right?
You go on thinking that.
Eternal optimist.
Yeah.
I know better. Actually, we will see some cooperation, for once, between the branches of the House of Finwë in this episode, so there is that. But before we get into that, Sean, does old Barliman have anything in his bag for us tonight?
He does, actually. He's got a couple of fun things for us tonight. But before I get into the mailbag questions, I actually want to give a little shout-out, a little elvish praise, a little aglario, alaitate, if I may.
I love that.
Thank you, sir. So we've picked up a few new followers on Twitter recently, ever since International Pod.
We're up to 11.
We're up to got a few more than that. I
didn't know that Twitter went to 11. There was your Spinal Tap reference. Okay.
There was your Spinal Tap reference for the night. Everything goes to 11, Alan. or this one goes to 11, at least.
At least.
Yeah. Ever since International Podcast Day, which is at the end of September, we've gotten some new followers, and I think a few of them actually listen to the show because we've also gotten some new reviews. So thank you.
That. Yes.
Yeah, isn't that cool? So thank you to those who've been retweeting us and sharing us on Twitter, and a extra special egalario to those of you who have posted reviews on iTunes. Those things are very valuable, like soil from Lothlorien. Every grain has a value, and truly every one of those reviews has great value to us. So we really appreciate that.
It is a kingly gift indeed. Some of you said such incredibly nice things. It made me wonder if you were listening to us while enjoying a few pints of the good stuff, but there aren't enough spelling errors for that. So
there's a few of those. You're like, are you sure you listened to the right podcast?
I'm not sure if you know what that means. So we'll take you at your word, and we do thank you for it. So thanks very much.
Yes, thank you. And now on to Barliman's bag. So first up, one of our listeners, Bruce M., tweeted us on Twitter, which is where people are doing the tweeting these days.
That's where they tweet. If you tweeted us on Facebook, that would be interesting.
That would just be strange.
Wouldn't that be like a news story or something?
Yeah. Facebook now taking Twitter. All right. Oh, man. I better move on. So Bruce M. has been catching up on the episodes and asked if we had ever defined the term legendarium. And if not, would we please? And I thought long and hard about this, and I don't think we have defined it.
You're right. I don't think we have. Oh, man.
No, I don't think we had. And I think he had gotten up to maybe episode 8 or 9 or something. So he still had a way to go, but I really don't think we ever defined it. So
I don't think we have, no.
No, and we should have defined it early on, because we've been throwing that term around since the very beginning of the show.
Well, it's a big word, Sean, and I like big words.
You do, and you pronounce it correctly. So there's that. I think we both do,
I have my good
which
points.
is amazing.
Well, that's because it's not Hebrew or any of the other languages we've managed to butcher.
Right. Oh, and we will just butcher more.
I'm sure we will.
But I did, so I apologized to Bruce on Twitter, and I answered the question on Twitter, but I also thought it would be worth saying here because, we really should have explained this a long time ago. So
I don't know how we missed out on that. I'm sorry.
No. So the Legendarium, or the Middle-earth Legendarium, is, I guess, the shortest, easiest way to explain it is it's the whole series of myths, all the stories that take place in Middle-earth, or I guess really technically in Arda, because Amon's not really part of Middle Earth.
True.
But I mean, it's basically everything from Ainulindale to the end of Lord of the Rings, isn't it? I mean, it's
the Silmarillion, it's the Hobbit, it's the Lord of the Rings, but it would also include some of the pieces from History of the Middle Earth, from or the History of Middle Earth, so like the Book of Lost Tales,
Unfinished
Tales.
Yeah.
So.
I think it includes all of it. I mean, I suppose, when you start getting into some of those, the certainly the history of Middle Earth, since there's so many competing versions, I guess you probably could argue, is it canon, is it not? And if it's not canon, is it really part of the Legendarium?
Yeah, that's a whole... I don't want to get into canon. Let's not try to define that.
No, I don't even want to. I don't even want to raise the question. But I think where I was going with that is I think that we can call it all the Legendarium, whether it's canon or not, or whether it's questionable or not. So
okay.
I think it's really just it's all the myths. That's the way I usually hear it used. And the reason we call it that is because that's what Tolkien called it. I think he actually used the term in 4 of his letters, I believe.
He did.
Most notably 131, and actually I've got it right here. So 131, 153, 154, and 163.
Wow.
And now I'm just showing off.
Yes, you are.
I have Google and a copy of the letters. That's really all that's about. But 131 is really, I think, the most notable one because that's the one.
It's the most accessible, folks. It's at the front of your book.
Right, exactly. And I think we referenced it in just the last episode.
I think we did.
Because it's in the preface to the Silmarillion. We were talking about Fëanor. And it's, the term is used right there on page, let's see here, Roman numeral 16.
Okay.
So that's what the Legendarium is. And again, apologies for not explaining that sooner.
Yeah, my apologies for that as well. I think we were making assumptions that we had no reason to make. And in fairness, I think the truth is we sometimes mean the main works of Middle Earth, because I don't think we always are referring to things like the Book of Lost Tales, or like the Annals, or the different versions of the Quenta, which all comprise different phases of his writing.
Right. Well, and especially when you look at something like the Book of Lost Tales, where it's there, so much of that is just completely replaced by what's in the Silmarillion.
Exactly. But that is still part of the Legendarium as a whole. It's because all a Legendarium is, now we're not talking about Tolkien's Legendarium, but the word Legendarium is just a literary collection of legends. That's really all it is. So in this case, we're talking about the Legendarium created by Tolkien, so it would be, surrounding Arda. So,
right.
Yeah.
And I guess one would, even in a real world Legendarium, one probably assumes that there's different versions of the same story, aren't there? I mean, you look at something like the Tales of King Arthur. There's a lot of different versions, whether you look at, Mallory or Tennyson or whoever you look at. So I never really thought about it until just now. Like these sort of represent just different versions of those tales.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It is interesting, but thank you for asking, and we do apologize for just kind of assuming everybody knew that. But, we'll try to be more specific next time if we're referring to only the I'm going to say the word canonical, but when I mean that is
I usually say the
printed or published stuff
text,
that wasn't posthumous, right? Well, except that the Silmarillion was posthumous, and I always include that in there. I guess a lot of times I want to leave out the history of Middle Earth only because not everybody has read it, and so I'm talking about the 3 main works, the Silmarillion, the Hobbit, and the Lord of the Rings. But
I sometimes think of it as the completed texts. And I know, even that is kind of questionable, but it's like after the Silmarillion, well, not counting Children of Húrin, I guess, but after the Silmarillion, Christopher Tolkien didn't even really try to finish them. He just presented them as drafts with commentary.
If he is going to finish something for us, can it please be of Tuor and Gondolin?
Yes, please.
Oh, man. Anyway.
Yes.
We'll get to that when we get to of Tuor.
Christopher Tolkien is listening, or anyone who has influence over Christopher Tolkien is listening.
If Christopher Tolkien was listening, my life has been... I'm done.
If Christopher Tolkien is listening, I'm not sure I want to know.
No, it would absolutely make it impossible for me to do this. But don't worry, I'm pretty sure he's not.
I'm pretty sure he's not.
So do we have any more questions before we make ourselves look like complete fools?
We do. Thank you for bringing me back to it. So last but not least, we've got a question from Tanya in New York, who people will remember Tanya's name, friend of the show, one of our frequent commentators. And this question of hers is kind of a long one, so bear with me here, folks. But it is a fascinating one, and it's going to give us a chance to talk about Fëanor one more time because we just aren't done with him yet.
Oh my!
So again, bear with me. I won't read every word of Tanya's email because she really put a lot of thought into this question. So
Okay.
apologies in advance, Tanya. I'm not going to read every single word, but I think I'm going to capture the main points of your question here. So she says, while reading chapter 6, I noticed for the first time the mention of the secret fire burning in Fëanor. I understand that this must be related to the secret fire, capital S, capital F, that burns in the world and is symbolic of Fëanor's enormous creative potential. But I get a feeling that there's more to this, and there's a relationship between Fëanor and all his actions and Eru's ultimate design, as if Eru sanctioned all that Fëanor has done, the good and the bad. Now, that comes from one email. In a later email, because she and I went back and forth on this for a little while, she adds something else. She says, I keep thinking about Miriel's words, for strength that would have nourished the life of many has gone forth into Fëanor. And this was actually from the supplemental story about her death in Morgoth's Ring.
Oh, the part that was in the Statute of Finwë and Miriel where we
Right.
talked about all that.
Yeah, exactly. She goes on to say, elves believe that all Fëanor come directly from Ilúvatar, and Ilúvatar... Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, as a reminder, Fëanor, because now I'm all worried about not defining words.
But
Fëanors
defining
are
words, yeah.
spirits,
Right.
Fëa and Roa. So that's, soul or spirit.
The soul and the body.
And the
Yep.
body. So Fëanor
Yep.
is just the plural of Fëa.
Right. And Ilúvatar, being omniscient, knew full well the effect that nourishment of a Fëa as powerful as Fëanor's would have on Miriel. But he sent him to her anyway, and in so doing triggered the chain of events that led to Melkor's ultimate demise. Now, I realize we haven't gotten to that yet, but, spoiler alert, it's coming at the end of the story. If it's just a great craftsman that Ilúvatar wanted to send to Arda, he could have sent the Fëa of this craftsman to any other Noldoran family that's not burdened by the responsibilities and the temptations of kingship. Another thing that makes me think that Fëanor was Ilúvatar's agent is seeing many references to fire. There are several phrases that stand out to me. I think they allude to the fact that Fëanor is more than an instrument of Eru. And so she's got a couple of quotes here. There's the quote,
Sure.
Fëanor grew swiftly as if a secret fire were kindled within him. We see that Fëanor was driven by the fire of his own heart only. We see Fëanor's own words at one point is, it may be that Eru has set in me a fire greater than thou knowest. And then, and she goes on to say that, his likeness has never again appeared in Arda, so that there seems to be a sense of uniqueness to that. So finally, she comes kind of...
Or more like a sense of lifetime imprisonment. But that's just...
and that is true. Yeah, that's true.
But...
But she goes on to say that, do you think it's possible that the fire that keeps being mentioned is the same secret fire that burns in the heart of Ea and guides all his actions? So, thank you for allowing me to read so much there. I hope it's clear now why I waited until this episode to ask this question, even though we saw Fëanor die in the last episode. For one thing, I just kind of wanted his death to sink in a little bit, and mainly I just wanted to make sure we had enough time, because I feel like we could spend quite a bit of time on this question.
I think we can. I think we will.
Yeah. So, what do you think, Alan? Why don't you start?
Well, my first thought is this another chance to beat up on Fëanor? And if so,
I think it is.
if so, should we offer trigger warnings to any of our snowflakes that might be listening?
Yes, we should. I think we're about to beat up on Fëanor a little bit more.
Well, at least I will.
I'm sure I'll be right there with you.
Now,
can't promise this will be the last time either.
No. Yeah. In fairness, this question, I really had to spend some time thinking this through, because she brings up some very interesting points.
She does. Yeah.
I mean, certainly Ilúvatar's omniscience and sovereignty make it impossible for me to conclude that he didn't at least know what might come of Fëanor's being given such a powerful Fëa. But I want to. It sounds to me like Tanya's focusing on the strength that would have nourished the life of many being just the strength of his Fëa, but that doesn't seem to me to be clear from the text. Not all of that strength is directly related to the strength of his spirit or his Fëa. The Fëa, of course, do come directly from Ilúvatar. That's, we know that. But
right.
The Proar, the bodies, are begotten by the parents themselves. I'm not sure I'm willing to concede that the strength that Muriel's talking about that would have nourished the life of many is referring solely to the strength of his spirit. Because in chapter 11, we find that Fëanor was the mightiest in all parts of body and mind of all the children of Ilúvatar.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
and certainly when she talks about, if she is in some way responsible for this strength, then it would certainly seem to come from the Hroa.
Exactly.
Because that's what comes from the parent as opposed to the Fëa. That's a good point.
Exactly. And so I think I'm sure she's referring to both to some extent. I mean, I don't think she's talking about only his body or only his spirit.
Sure,
but,
yeah.
We kind of talked about this at the time without reaching an answer. We speculate a lot. Back in chapter 6, when Muriel said this, we were asking, was she consciously involved in providing the strength that nourished the life of many, or whether she was just maybe aware? I noticed that this is happening, but I have no ability to make it less.
Okay.
Right.
Meaning the question of did she choose to, or did she do it on purpose?
Exactly.
Or was she just aware it was happening?
That's the question, isn't it? Because if she was aware, that is, she's just kind of in tune with what's happening, then that's one thing. But if she's consciously making a decision to pour into Fëanor strength that would have nourished the life of many, the question should be asked, was that a wise or even a moral decision on her part?
Right. And we did ask that question.
We can't answer that. Right. It's a totally unanswerable question because we don't know to what extent the strength was something that was sourced from her or whether it just was she was a conduit. But I don't think that I can concede that it's just his Fëa. And so that kind of takes away a lot of her follow-up line of reasoning, because a lot of that hinges on the strength of his Fëa. And I'm thinking that it, that may not be what we're talking about here. But let's get to the heart of the question. I mean, that part's interesting, but the heart of the question is this idea of Fëanor as Ilúvatar's agent, based particularly at least on the use of fire imagery. Now, I'm going to take my reputation in my own hands here. Because I usually, when I disagree with Tanya, I'm wrong. But I'm going to go ahead and disagree with our esteemed listener's opinion on this one, at least in part. I do agree that it's a fascinating question, and I concede the likelihood, and I would even say certainty, that what you just talked about, that Fëanor was intended by Ilúvatar to do great things. His Fëa was great.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that, and that did come from Ilúvatar. Chapter 11 says as much in discussing the mourning of the Valar for the marring of Fëanor, in terms of the great things that he would have done. The works of wonder for the glory of Arda that he might otherwise have wrought, only Manwë might in some measure conceive.
That's right.
Yeah, and we know that Manwë understands most clearly Ilúvatar's purposes. That's from Valaquenta. So, those tie in there.
So that does suggest a connection between, what he might have wrought being maybe very closely tied to Ilúvatar's purposes. Yeah.
Right, exactly. But see, all the children of Ilúvatar have free will to some extent. We can get to the whole idea of men having more than elves. But it seems abundantly clear to me, at least, and this is, I'm not making a huge argument here, I'm just kind of stating the facts seem to fit this pattern. Fëanor seemed to use his free will in opposition to the will of Ilúvatar, as expressed through the Valar. So I can't draw the conclusion from that Ilúvatar sanctioned all of that.
And I'm actually going to raise something that I think some listeners might be thinking, which is, and I know we haven't talked about this, but it just kind of popped into my head. That's assuming that the Valar and the will of Ilúvatar are in tune with one another.
Well, that's true. I don't think they're identical because I think we know that the Valar make mistakes.
Yeah.
They're not, they don't have it.
Right.
But that's why I was saying the will of Ilúvatar as expressed through the Valar. That is, we do know that
so the degree to which the degree to which the Valar are actually carrying out the plan of Ilúvatar.
Right.
Gotcha. Okay.
And to that extent, I'm thinking of just simple things like Manwë being the king of Arda. So he's in charge. So what he says goes. Right. So if he says go spend 12 years alone, then go spend 12 years alone.
12-year timeout, sir.
Right. Exactly. And also things like try not to kill other people. I mean, that might be a general...
Starting with your half-brother.
And then starting with the entire kin of... Yeah. But, I will say the fire imagery is certainly intriguing. That did get me thinking, but I have to say at the end, I'm going to have to disagree again. I think we see that generally Tolkien was careful about the use of capital letters. I'm thinking of, for example, the world. Every time he talks about the world with a capital W, he's not talking about Arda, he's talking about Ea. He's talking about the entire existence.
And we have talked about that in earlier episodes.
Yeah, and he does that same thing with the secret fire and with the flame imperishable. And here we see as if a secret fire were kindled within him. Now, that seems similar because it uses the same word, secret fire. But the lack of capitalization, at least to me, again, speaks volumes in its silence. It's not the secret fire, capital S, capital F, but simply a secret fire. But that, if it's even that, because really it's a metaphor, as if a secret fire were kindled within him. If the line were, Fëanor grew swiftly because a secret fire was kindled within him, well, then maybe we have a different conversation. But that's just a metaphor, as if a secret fire were kindled within him. It's the same kind of metaphor that, we talk about with the Balrog's wings, right? It's a metaphor.
Right. Interesting. Okay.
So I don't know that I go there, mostly because of what we talked about just a couple episodes ago, that with very few exceptions, Arian being one of them, and that was what we were talking about was that fire is generally associated with the bad things. It's good when it's the secret fire or the flame imperishable, but outside of that, not so much. We get that description of Melkor. He's this mountain that wades in the seas, crowned with smoke and fire. The light of the eyes of Melkor was like a flame that withers with heat. He kindled great fires. He devised heats and fire without restraint. He even descended through fire and wrath to a great burning. And then, of course, his most powerful servants, we love the Valaraukar here, the scourges of fire.
Right.
So if fire is somehow an indication of somebody as an agent of Iluvatar, we got to look at Melkor, and that doesn't register.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting you say that, because I think we can look to Melkor first, at least in his origin. And
yes, that's true.
I mean,
the intention.
Yeah, but I want to let you finish, and then maybe I'll offer some
I can't
thoughts.
wait to hear your thoughts, because see, here's the thing. He's not really a direct agent, neither is Melkor, but both of those things bring me back to Spibimi. I mean, in a way, and I'm going to say in a very indirect way, and certainly not the way I think Tanya intended. She's right. Fëanor was, in the end, an agent of Iluvatar, as was Melkor, as has every Vala, Maya, elf, man, dwarf, ant, hobbit, and orc that's ever trod the globe of Arda. Because, like Iluvatar said, no theme may be played that hath not its uttermost source in me, nor can any alter the music in my despite. He that attempteth this shall prove but mine instrument in the devising of things more wonderful, which he himself hath not imagined. So, indirectly, is Iluvatar's will in the end accomplished? Well, yeah. But not because Fëanor was acting under his direction or even with his permission. The boom, Eru stamp of approval.
It's a very big stamp.
This genocide gets the stamp of Eru's approval. It comes back.
They were armed with slender bows. They had it coming.
Exactly. That's their own fault for just keeping up with slender bows. What's up with that? But it comes back to something we talked about recently. We talked about the fire recently. We also talked about this idea of moral culpability and freedom of will going hand in hand. And, we talked about how you can't have one without the other, because it's not just to hold somebody morally culpable if they didn't have freedom of will, but you can't give somebody freedom of will without also assigning them moral culpability for their actions. So if it's going to be unjust for Mandos to rehouse Fëanor immediately because, Morgoth made me do it, it's going to be just as unjust. So that was a poorly phrased sentence. It's going to be equally unjust for Mandos to keep Fëanor in the halls of waiting until the destruction of Arda, if in fact Iluvatar made me do it. So that's kind of where I land on that, for a number of reasons then. But now that I've spent our entire episode talking about this, what are your thoughts?
Oh, that was good. I'm glad. You definitely spent a lot of time thinking about it, and I think that's good. It's a good question. I think it is. It's a question that deserves a discussion like this. Mm-hmm. So again, thank you, Tanya.
Yeah, definitely.
I do think she makes a lot of really interesting points. I think that the part where she kind of won me over a bit is the circumstances of Fëanor's birth. I think I'm a little bit more willing to accept the the idea that he was born special and that Iluvatar had a lot to do with that the circumstances of his birth and the extra, sort of the extra spark, the extra secret fire that he had there. And I think that
extra secret fire.
It's an extra secret fire.
It's the Colonel's extra secret fire recipe.
There's a 12th herb and spice in there.
Do you want the original secret fire or the extra secret fire? Some
of our international listeners probably are not going to get the Kentucky Fried Chicken reference.
No, they're not. No. I apologize for that.
It was my fault.
This is our apology episode, so let's just get them all in.
Yeah, exactly. No, so I do think that he certainly looks like he was born special, and I do think it makes sense that Iluvatar in his omniscience would have known what would happen to Miriel. I
but
think
even
a
then,
little
wouldn't
more.
she have had free will a little bit? I mean, I agree. Wouldn't he have known that it would certainly be a great cost to her? Yes, I believe he would have known that. But let's say he even foresaw her going to the Halls of Mendos and giving up her life. She still had the choice. She could have gone back and been rebodied, and in fact, later on, she did, but only thanks to Finwë's sacrifice. I mean,
well, she had that. She did have those choices, and she had the choice to lay down her own life. But how much was her choice to put all that nourishment into Fëanor? I don't think we have an answer.
We don't have an answer. To that.
That could be something. I mean, we know nothing about Elvish. Well, we know a little bit about Elvish gestation, but not that much. And I don't think we know exactly how much control she had over that aspect.
Yeah, or
the
amount of strength that went into him. You're right. We don't know.
Right, exactly. And I think I am probably a little bit more inclined, maybe hearing it again now, I think I'm a little more inclined to think that this was something she was aware of rather than she was choosing to do.
I think if I had to pick one, that's probably it. I have a hard time believing that she consciously would have chosen to, give so much. But yeah. Yeah.
But I do think, I think I'm a little bit more accepting of this idea that the secret fire was the secret fire, or, maybe not the only secret, the secret fire, but a manifestation or a,
well, every living creature, every sentient creature has a manifestation of the secret fire. Because
that's true.
It's it's that evidence of independence, of you are a created, existing, sentient being.
Right.
Because you have the secret fire. The orcs don't have the secret fire. They're not.
Right.
They're more under the control of Morgoth.
Morgoth,
if Morgoth disappeared, they would just
his
kind of
will. Yeah.
Right. They would be wandering around, slobbering, and
Yeah.
with no direction.
Right. No, that's a good point. And the other thing that the secret fire makes me think of is it always takes me back to Mythopoeia and this idea of the refracted light.
Yes.
Through whom is splintered from a single white to many hues. And that's, when he's speaking of man as subcreator, or I think in this case, elf as subcreator. So that does kind of bring me to the idea that maybe it was a super subcreative spark that was given to him. But I think Tanya's already sort of preempted my response there, because she does say, well, if Iluvatar just wanted to create a great craftsman, why not just make, another Rumil or Matan or somebody, just somebody to be born in a lower born family.
Right.
Why a prince? Why the crown prince?
The eventual king. Right. Exactly.
Right. Exactly. So I do think that all of those things do line up to give some credence to the theory that Fëanor was intended to be a special agent of Iluvatar upon Arda. Yeah. And I think it would probably be something, what is he here for? I think it would probably be to do something in the fight against Morgoth. I think that's ultimately why all of the children of Iluvatar are created. If you remember, they were actually part of the third theme, and the third theme was a response to Melkor's discord in the music, in his rebellion. So it could be that Fëanor was given a greater share of the secret fire to be a kind of super being to help heal the hurts of Arda. And all I can think of now is Dune, like he's the Kwisatz Haderach.
That's exactly what I was thinking. I almost said that, and I'm like, I'll probably mispronounce it.
I probably mispronounced it. I probably went
awesome.
But so maybe. But so I think I'm willing to believe that he was intended for great things. He was given an extra share of the juice, the power to do great things with. But
I
from
agree.
there,
I would concede that.
Yeah, but I think that he did stray from the path, and I think that's where I depart from Tanya here. I think that just because he started out that way doesn't mean that everything he did was, what Iluvatar had the Iluvatar stamp of approval, as you put it. I think much like Melkor himself, who was gifted beyond compare.
That's a very good analogy.
Yeah, and
clearly Melkor to Fëanor a lot.
Every 5 minutes, I think.
Pretty much.
And I think that they were both, and I think Melkor and Fëanor were both given gifts because they were intended for great things.
They were the greatest of their kind, created the greatest, each of them
both
the greatest
of them,
of their kind, no doubt.
Both of them were. But I do think that, having seen Tolkien's own words about Fëanor's fall in Letter 131, it seems clear that Tolkien himself saw it as an evil. I don't think that Tolkien's own inclination would be that this was something that Iluvatar was behind in such a direct way. I would say that if Fëanor was sort of an experiment at a Kwisatz Haderach of elves, I think he was a failed experiment. And I think that while he might have set into motion a chain of events that ultimately led to Morgoth's downfall, he didn't wipe out all evil. He didn't unmar Arda. And I think that this is key because if Fëanor was the only elf that could be gifted in this way, having failed, the next hope for Arda actually would come through men. And we see that in places like the Otherbeth and things where, where men are really the salvation is kind of a loaded word, so I apologize. Men are sort of the
you're right, though. That's the best word.
That's all I can think of.
They save it.
Men are the hope for Arda, maybe is the better way to say it.
Maybe.
And the elves were just there to sort of ennoble men for that purpose. So,
or to embiggen them.
Is that a Simpsons reference?
There's your Simpsons reference to go along with your Spinal Tap reference.
That's great. That's awesome.
Every time I hear the word ennoble, somehow that's the word that comes to mind is embiggen.
What was the quote? It's like something embiggens the soul or something.
Yeah, something, but I literally haven't watched that show in, 15 years.
Yeah, and it's still on.
Which is mind-boggling.
I haven't seen it in a long time. So, anyway, I do think that, the hope for Arda would come from elsewhere, and I think it's worth noting that, maybe Fëanor set this chain of events into motion, but who fulfills that purpose is not someone of Fëanor's lineage.
Yeah,
I'll just put it that way.
None of his kin.
Right, exactly. So, kind of coming back to, Spabimi, really, I think is where I'm coming to, at the same place you ended up, which is, I think it's really more good coming out of evil as opposed to Iluvatar approved of everything along the way. And I think it's, I don't think Tolkien ultimately gives us any answers to the grand question of, why do evil things happen in the world? I don't think that there's any solid answers to that.
Well, a theologian would write books that would be longer than all of the legendarium to try to answer that one.
Right, exactly.
The Theodicy question is something that has been a thorn in the side of theologians for 2,000 plus years.
Thousands and thousands of years.
5,000 plus years,
Yeah, exactly. But I do think that the one thing we do know Tolkien believed in was Spabimi and eucatastrophe, and the idea that anything bad can be turned into good. And so that's kind of where I'm ending up with it, is that it's basically what you said, good coming out of bad, but I don't think that everything had the stamp of approval, which is my new favorite catchphrase of yours, is the Iluvatar stamp of approval.
Iluvatar stamp of approval. We'll have to get a graphic designer to help us design an Eru stamp of approval, because Iluvatar won't fit on the little circle.
This is true,
the tiny print. So, the Eru circle of approval or something, stamp of approval.
Yep.
It'll have to look like the UL symbol. I don't even know what that is. I just know it's the UL symbol of approval. I have no clue.
Isn't it like United Laboratories or something?
That's what it is. Yeah. I know somebody will write in and explain that for us. We appreciate that. Thank you in advance.
We're going way off the deep end.
We are. On that note, why don't we try and get back in? We'll actually jump into the discussion. I don't think we have any more mail, do we? Because we're not.
No, we do not. I don't think we have. We got a chapter to talk about here. So
that's probably a good thing that we don't have anymore.
But thank you, Tanya. Really excellent question.
It really
excellent ideas. We certainly have some opinions about them. Hope you enjoyed the discussion, and as always, we invite you to continue the discussion with us.
Well, I hope everybody else enjoyed it too.
Yes, yes.
I mean, that's
yeah.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get into the discussion. When we last left this chapter, let's see, we ended up with Caranthir and his little scheme to get rich with the dwarves. But so we're going to pick up at that after that paragraph break, and I'll go ahead and read the first couple paragraphs here, I think.
All right, take us away.
When 20 years of the sun had passed, Fingolfin, king of the Noldor, made a great feast, and it was held in the spring near to the pools of Ivren, whence the swift river Narog rose. For there the lands were green and fair at the feet of the mountains of shadow that shielded them from the north. The joy of that feast was long remembered in later days of sorrow, and it was called Mereth Adderthad, the Feast of Reuniting. Thither came many of the chieftains and people of Fingolfin and Finrod, and of the sons of Fëanor, Maedhros and Maglor, with warriors of the eastern march. And there came also great numbers of the Grey Elves, wanderers of the woods of Beleriand, and folk of the havens, with Círdan their lord. There came even green elves from Osiriand, the land of 7 rivers, far off under the walls of the Blue Mountains. But out of Doriath there came but 2 messengers, Mablung and Dairon, bearing greetings from the king. At Mereth Adderthad many counsels were taken in goodwill, and oaths were sworn of league and friendship. And it is told that at this feast the tongue of the Grey Elves was most spoken even by the Noldor, for they learned swiftly the speech of Beleriand, whereas the Sindar were slow to master the tongue of Valinor. The hearts of the Noldor were high and full of hope, and to many among them it seemed that the words of Fëanor had been justified, bidding them seek freedom and fair kingdoms in Middle-earth. And indeed there followed after long years of peace, while their swords fenced Beleriand from the ruin of Morgoth, and his power was shut behind his gates. In those days there was joy beneath the new sun and moon, and all the land was glad. But still the shadow brooded in the north. Because we can't have a couple,
foreboding,
isn't it? I know, because we can't have a couple really cool paragraphs and like a big old party without something
horrible being hinted at the end. Yeah.
Thanks. It's really a little downer on that. Thanks for the
thanks a lot, Shadow.
Appreciate that. Well, let's pull up Loader Project again, huh? Shall we? LOTRproject.com to remind everybody. I know we've used this a couple times, and we'll be using it next episode heavily.
We will, and in fact, I have actually added a link to it, a permanent link to it on our webpage.
Good.
Right up there on the right-hand column, so it's always easy to find from our webpage. It's
going to be a big help, not only be a big help next episode, but, in the future when we get to The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, it's going to be another great resource. But for now, let's pull up and try to find out where's this party? Where's the party at, yo? Mm-hmm. Is yo in Sindarin, or is that a Quenya? Okay.
I think it's spelled I-O, and it's probably Quenya.
Yo, yes, you're right. That would be Quenya. Okay, so if we look for the big thing that'll be easiest to find is Dorloman. So over there, kind of in the northwest. Mm-hmm. If you look immediately to the south in the mountains, you'll see a place called Ithil Irvin. And it is Ivren.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's
such an easy word.
That VR is kind of a weird consonant combination for.
It really is, at least for
English speakers.
I almost did that in the read-through, and I caught it then, but not this time. So it was held there near to the pools of Ivren, near the source of the river Narog. Mm-hmm. So that's where the party was. And so it was sheltering them from the, in the north, the mountains there. So that's where the party was. So that means we had folks coming. Now zoom back out, you'll see that there were folks coming all the way from the Falas. And
which is going to be down just a sort of due south and a little bit west of that.
Mm-hmm. And then you also had folks come from the March of Maedhros, which is way over to the east, between Dorthonion and the Blue Mountains. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, you had the Green Elves from Osiriand, which is all the way over into the south. Right. If this is a map of the United States and the party was someplace in Colorado, this would be Florida.
Yeah,
it's all the way to the southeast. So, though the map, of course, isn't that big. Please forget I said that.
It's just it. Yeah,
I'm just saying it's that far. It's all the way on the other side of the map,
right?
and on the other.
We know what. Yeah, we gotcha.
So you had folks from all over coming, and
the last thing we need is somebody like telling us how big Beleriand is compared to the American continent, and yeah.
And then we'll also have somebody call me ethnocentric for comparing it to that, and I'm sorry. It's just the only map with which I'm familiar.
Well,
I'm sorry. It's where I live. Okay.
I forgive you. I think we all forgive you.
Thank you so much. But interestingly, Doriath, which is actually much closer than, say, the Falas or Osirian, sent only 2 on that incredibly long journey. We'll get to that, won't we? Yeah. So anyway, that's the geography of the party. But let's take a look at who showed up.
Who actually was there? Yeah.
So we get what? We get chieftains and people of Fingolfin and Finrod. Now that's Fingolfin is the heir to the throne now.
Right. He is the High King of the Noldor at this point.
Yeah. He is the king. Maedhros and Maglor come, but
well, and Finrod, I think it's worth pointing out that Finrod is he's the eldest son of Finarfin, who of course is back in Valinor. So
Finarfin turned around, and
he's sort of standing in. He's kind of a proxy for his father, I think, sort of here. He's representing that branch of the family for sure.
Yeah, I think so. Then you get of
though I don't mean to imply he's the only one of the family there. I think.
Oh no, I'm sure Galadriel. She was a party girl. I'm sure she was there.
In her youth,
Well, yeah, she hadn't settled down yet. We'll get to that.
Right. Yeah.
Maedhros and Maglor were there, but they were the only sons of Fëanor to show up. So the other 5, the twins, and then the 3 nasty C's, they didn't show up.
Right.
Caranthir was out there trying to make too much profit.
Making his money, yeah.
Yeah, he didn't want to step away from his accounting.
Right.
We also get Mablung and Dairon from Doriath. So Thingol sent them a nice
sent greetings.
Sent them a Hallmark card, but
right. Maybe sent them a fruit basket,
box of chocolates, but they got melted on the way. Gray elves, so Sindar from the woods and Sindar from the Falas with Círdan, and then the green elves.
Yep.
So tell me a little bit about what we should read into Doriath only sending those 2.
Well, I do think it's interesting. I mean, we are told that they are bearing greetings from the king. Okay, great. And these 2 guys are no slouches. I mean, Mablung is Thingol's chief captain.
Yeah.
Dairon is Thingol's chief lore master. In fact, he's the guy who created the Kurth runes. Yeah. So, and he was also a friend to Luthien, if I recall correctly, a close friend to Luthien. So, these are 2 guys who are, they are in with the royal family of Doriath.
No doubt.
Absolutely. But, I mean, Thingol is close family. He's actually Finrod and Galadriel's great uncle.
That's true.
I think his absence is really a message. I think it's a subtle snub. I think it's a subtle message that they're not entirely welcome here. I don't know. That's kind of what I read into it, and I'm not trying to knock Thingol. I think we see enough about Thingol to know that he doesn't really love the fact that the Noldor have come back, especially when he finds that they're not here to.
Yeah, we just saw that a few paragraphs ago, right?
Yeah,
I mean, he told him, well, you can live here and here, but you can't live here, and you can't do this, and beware how you bury yourselves. I am the Lord of Beleriand. So he's
Yeah, so I think this is just a continuation of that. A
little bit of saber rattling.
Message.
Yeah,
yeah, I think so.
Interesting. Well, then we get the league and friendship, right? We get alliances made, and then we get. I think this is fascinating. It's not just the Noldor, but the Sindar that are doing this too. But how do they swear these oaths?
That is interesting. Yeah,
they don't swear them in Quenya, do they?
In Quenya, no, they do not. No, they speak Sindarin.
It's interesting. The Sindar were slow to master the tongue of Valinor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I wonder, the Noldor must have given them some really pleasant names since they're so good at naming people who are slow.
I'm sure they came up with all kinds of passive-aggressive things to call them, starting with the dark elf.
Yeah. In the caves. These cave dwellers. I'm sure they would have called them cave dwellers, illiterates.
Probably. Yeah.
Anyway.
I do think this is really significant.
It is.
Though.
That's what I was going to ask you, is talk to us about that, because, when it comes to language, I always go to you and say, okay, this is yours.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, remember the last time we heard about the Sindar not being able to master a language? It was actually the Khuzdul of the dwarves. Right. And I'm going to correct my pronunciation on that, because one of our listeners recently
yes, thank you.
recently reminded me that I was pronouncing that a little
today, I think.
Yes, just today. That's hot off the presses. Probably get into that a little bit more in our next episode. But so they had a little trouble speaking the dwarvish language. Man, I just said dwarfish.
Dwarf? Oh,
I know. It's too much Disney in my life these days. Yeah, they couldn't get their mouths around the words of the dwarves because they were cumbrous and unlovely. Here we see that they can't master the Quenya language, and I think it's actually for the opposite reason.
Maybe the problem isn't with the dwarves. Maybe the problem's with the Sindar.
Maybe the Sindar are just bad at languages.
They just need like a Rosetta Stone program or something.
They're just that one kid that just couldn't really master the languages, But no, I really do believe that it has a lot to do with the fact
again and again.
Yeah, remedial Quenya.
It's a college prep class. You've got to take your 2 years of Quenya or you'll never get to college.
Right. It is the elf Latin, they say.
Why would I want to study a dead language, Mom?
Oh, man. Too fun.
Oh, goodness.
I studied a dead language. I studied the real Latin. But yeah, I think here it really is the opposite problem that they had with the Khuzdul language, is that I think the problem here is that they're not Kalaquendi, and Quenya was a language bred in the light of Valinor. So we talked a little bit about sundering of language.
It's too lovely instead of unlovely.
Exactly.
It's too rich.
Right, and we talked a little bit about the sundering of languages. I think it was in the last episode.
It was.
The closer the elves got to the light, the more light the language was, and I think the Sindar just couldn't really grasp it.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
But I think it's also interesting that we've also talked, I think, about how language is culture.
Right.
Language is a representative of culture in Tolkien's world, and I think the adoption of Sindarin by the Noldor is a sign of a sort of acceptance of the culture of the Grey Elves, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
It's an acceptance of, hey, we know this is your land, we're here, and we're going to learn your language, and I don't know, it just kind of strikes me as a very different sentiment than what we saw from Caranthir just a couple of pages ago, calling Fingal a dark elf in his caves, as we were just alluding to. So I think that there's, again, Tolkien is always saying very, very subtle but very important things about the linguistic choices in his world, and I think this is no exception.
I agree. Yeah, and that's and definitely something I wanted to touch on, because, like you said, every time there's a language issue, there's a real reason behind it. Mm-hmm. Tolkien loved seeing his languages develop and change and mutate and split and then merge back together in some cases. And this is just another example of that. But you talked about the culture. I was thinking about how, I wouldn't be surprised if this was almost a way for the Noldor to sort of, put their past behind them, kind of adopting Sindarin as sort of a, Valinor? What Valinor? They left all that behind. Right. They know they can't go back. I'm sure there's a little bit of pain we know there's a little bit of regret for a lot of these folks that, there's regret and shame at, like, the burning of the ships and the abandonment of their kin, at least for the Fëanorian followers. And, I'm sure there's some little bit of regret that, we're not in paradise anymore. We're out here. We got to make it on our own.
Yeah.
And
maybe even almost a sentiment of that this language fits this place.
That's true.
We're kind of out here roughing it a little bit. This is not a place for the Quenya language, which I know is a little different from what quite different.
No, but I hear what you're saying, though. That's a very interesting thought too. It doesn't that tie into what we talked about with Doctors Femi and Higgins about the essay on phonetic symbolism.
Yeah,
and the idea that words, fit a language.
Words have to fit the things they mean.
Words have to fit the things being described, and the language fits the place in this case. That Sindarin fits Middle Earth, while Quenya fits,
Fits Valinor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't think that's a stretch at all. I think that's a good point. Yeah.
I hadn't thought of that about that until you mentioned what you did about it fitting the land. But that makes some good sense for sure. But
I also like this thought that, it's a way to put the past behind them too. I like that a lot. I mean, and we do see, I guess we probably shouldn't take it too far, because we do see that they still use Quenya among themselves.
Oh yeah.
And even later, even when they have to speak Sindarin for lots of reasons. Yeah. They still use Quenya among themselves. So, there is some pride of culture, I think, there. But, I mean, maybe shame has a lot to do with it. You never know. They don't want to be, they don't want to be speaking this language of the exiles around their new friends.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point.
Really interesting,
isn't it? And we could go on. I mean, all of that out of just a few, a few sentences,
just a couple of lines. Yeah,
we can go on and on. And we do. But then we end with, of course, like we talked about, the foreboding. So it's all good,
shadow.
And there's cooperation, but there's this reminder: Morgoth's up there, already figuring out what he's going to do next.
Yeah. The elves just can't just hang out and sing Kumbaya. I mean, they're
for 1,000 years or whatever else.
Right, exactly. So
another verse. No, please no.
Yeah.
Eru, no.
But it's so right what you said. We can't have nice things, because there's always something horrible waiting on the horizon.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, you built these nice trees. Great. There's a big giant spider out on the other side of the mountains.
You're right. Right, exactly.
Oh man.
Too soon.
Too soon? I don't know.
Yeah. So
yeah.
So who steps in?
Who always steps in?
I guess this takes me to my passage, doesn't it?
Yeah, if you can read that next paragraph for us.
Yep. And when again 30 years had passed, Turgon, son of Fingolfin, left Nevrast where he dwelt, and sought out Finrod his friend upon the island of Tolsirion. And they journeyed southward along the river, being weary for a while of the northern mountains. And as they journeyed, night came upon them beyond the meres of twilight, beside the waters of Sirion, and they slept upon his banks beneath the summer stars. But Ulmo, coming up the river, laid a deep sleep upon them, and heavy dreams, and the trouble of the dreams remained after they awoke. But neither said aught to the other, for their memory was not clear, and each believed that Ulmo had sent a message to him alone. But unquiet was upon them ever after, and doubt of what should befall. And they wandered often alone in untrodden lands, seeking far and wide for places of hidden strength. For it seemed to each that he was bidden to prepare for a day of evil, and to establish a retreat, lest Morgoth should burst from Angband and overthrow the armies of the north.
Wow.
So Ulmo jumping in here.
Yep.
And putting a little...
as is his wont.
As is his wont, and lighting a little fire under Turgon and Finrod here.
Yep.
And I know it reminds me a little bit of like the grasshopper and the ant. I think that's the old isn't that the old fable?
Yeah.
The other Noldor just kind of enjoying the peace and having fun, and Finrod and Turgon are now
having a big party.
Yeah, and now Finrod and Turgon are just kind of have this restless, this unquiet that's upon them ever after, and so they're going to be looking for places of hidden strength. They know something bad is going to come.
Yeah.
And they are going to go look for a place to kind of the place they can defend, I guess.
A defensible place.
And so let's maybe we take another look at the map.
That's what I was going to say. Where did they have this this little get together? The island of Tolsirion. So let's go ahead and find where we were before, Ithel Ivrin. Now go northeast along the ridge of the mountains there, and where Sirion goes between the mountains and carves through that valley. You'll see the Fen of Serek up north. In between there, you'll see in tiny little print Tolsirion. That's an island in the middle of the river. And that would be where they were when they slept upon the banks of the river.
Right.
I love that the river's always described as a hymn, by the way. I think that's cool. They slept upon his banks beneath the summer stars.
I know. Yeah, I was
cool about that.
I was noticing that when I read the next chapter, and I'm still trying to figure out exactly why that's the case, but I haven't had any luck finding a definitive answer for why rivers are always he.
I'll try to tackle that before our next episode, see if I can find it.
Yeah, I'm still working on it too. Stuff to come.
Find an answer.
A reason to listen to our next episode.
There you go. Well, I hope there's more than just that one, but let's see. So, and now we'll look later at this map again to see where they end up. But I just wanted to bring that around to you.
Yeah.
So we can see.
Well, and also, and I think it's also it's worth noting that Turgon's realm at this time was actually in Neverest. Mm-hmm. And that's where he started out. And so that's way over on the western coast. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if you're at Tolkien, where we just were, it's kind of west and a little bit south, really, along that ridge of mountains, really all the way. I mean, it's the region that's right there off the coast. But then his realm, I believe, was actually Vinyamar,
which is
all
right the
there.
way over by the coast.
Yeah.
Not quite, but almost. Yeah.
Yeah.
Long way away.
Very. So yeah, these guys are going to do some wandering. They're doing some rambling.
Well, yeah, we're going to see, and yeah, they definitely Finrod especially ends up going quite a ways away to build his little realm. But you know, the first thing that kind of jumped out of my mind here was the fact that that even though they had Ulmo's help, and that certainly is a big point, the fact is they listened to him and acted. And it shows great wisdom and discernment on their part.
I agree.
You know, we see later, and again, spoiler alert, others who don't listen to Ulmo, much to their dismay. Mm-hmm. And in fact, sadly, it's Finrod's realm that ends up suffering.
Yes.
But, you know, that's in the distant future. But listening to your Ainur, you know.
Yeah.
People should be saying that to the people who don't listen to Melian. Have you ever noticed nobody listens to Melian?
Nobody ever listens to Melian.
She's a freaking Ainu. Listen to her.
Her husband doesn't even listen to her.
I know.
It's unbelievable. Dude, what do you really think you know better than a Maya? You married up, man. Don't forget that.
Yeah, big time.
Remember, thou art Elda.
But I thought that was encouraging. I mean, I think that speaks very, very well of both Turgon and Finrod that they.
It does, yeah.
You know, that they take action on this.
Yeah.
But let's go ahead and let's move on to see what they do in response. We'll start with what Finrod does.
Yeah.
Then Finrod. Okay, so let's set the scene briefly. They were actually in Doriath. So Finrod and Galadriel are in Doriath. Then Finrod was filled with wonder at the strength and majesty of Menegroth, its treasuries and armories, and its many pillared halls of stone. And it came into his heart that he would build wide halls behind ever-guarded gates in some deep and secret place beneath the hills. Therefore he opened his heart to Thingol, telling him of his dreams, and Thingol spoke to him of the deep gorge of the river Narog, and the caves under the high Faroth in its steep western shore. And when he departed, he gave him guides to lead him to that place of which few yet knew. Thus Finrod came to the caverns of Narog, and began to establish there deep halls and armories after the fashion of the mansions of Menegroth, and that stronghold was called Nargothrond. In that labor Finrod was aided by the dwarves of the Blue Mountains, and they were rewarded well, for Finrod had brought more treasures out of Tirion than any other of the princes of the Noldor. And in that time was made for him the Nauglamir, the necklace of the dwarves, most renowned of their works in the elder days. It was a carcanet of gold, and set therein were gems uncounted from Valinor. But it had a power within it, so that it rested lightly on its wearer as a strand of flax, and whatsoever neck it clasped, it sat always with grace and loveliness. There in Nargothrond, Finrod made his home with many of his people, and he was named in the tongue of the dwarves Felagund, hewer of caves, and that name he bore thereafter until his end. But Finrod Felagund was not the first to dwell in the caves beside the river Narog. And again...
And there again, we can't have nice things. We're reminded of something. Something we don't know how bad this is going to be yet, but
I couldn't help but think of Mando's. Not the first.
Not the first.
Not the first.
That's right. That's right.
Not the one. You're not the one.
That foreboding. Yeah. This is going to be important. We don't have to belabor it now.
No.
In fact, we should not. But this is going to be important. Remember this little detail that
yes.
Finrod Felagund was not the first.
Yeah. It'll be a while before we come up on that.
Yeah.
But let's see where it is. Let's see where it is first.
Let's do that.
So let's take a look. If we follow the Nayrog down from Ithil Ivrin, where the party was, down south, and then you'll see Realm of Nargothrond. There's your hint. Nargothrond itself
we're getting close.
Is right there at the northern edge of the Tauren Feroth Mountains. Right. There's a road that you see.
Well,
go ahead.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I think the Tower in Faroth is actually the forest, because Tower is forest.
Oh, yeah,
I'm trying to remember what the name of these mountains. Oh, it's it's the Ondram. It's the Ondram is that line of hills that runs basically across East Beleriand. So
my mistake. I was looking at Tower is forest. I don't know how.
Well, but it's right there where the Tower in Faroth meets.
Right.
I guess the northwest tip of the Ondram.
The High Feroth, because the text talks about the caves under the High Feroth and its steep western shore.
Right.
So it's on the western side of the river. That may not be quite as obvious from the map unless you zoom in, but Nargothrond is on the western side of the map, western side of the river, and you can see that it's at the end of that little road that runs all the way from Tol Sirion down through across the Tiglan, just through the western edge of the forest of Brethil, and then down to Nargothrond. So in that labor, he was aided by dwarves of the Blue Mountains. So those dwarves took a long walk to work. Because the Blue Mountains, again, are the ones on the far eastern side of the map. So, they
maybe the first thing they hewed was their own caves.
Yeah, well,
their extended stay caves.
There was no Holiday Inn Express there or extended stay suites.
Right.
But hey, they got good pay out of it.
Yes, they did. Well, I think it's really interesting that you pointed out that though the motivation came from Ulmo, the inspiration came from Menegroth.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
It is, and I think it's also interesting that just like Menegroth, he actually got the dwarves of the Blue Mountains to help him build
the same laborers. That's right.
Yeah.
You go to a friend's house, you're like, man, I really like this. Who is your architect? Who is your general contractor?
Right, exactly. Do you have a card?
Exactly. I want to give him a call, see if he's available.
Yeah.
I'm curious. They were super rewarded from this. He brought more treasures out of Tirion than other of the princes of the Noldor. What were they? I mean,
I wonder. We'll never know.
No. They were certainly. I don't think it was anything that Fëanor created. He wasn't going to give him anything.
Probably not. No.
Well, I mean, other than a finger.
But,
I mean, that's
a burning.
Yeah, burning ships.
No, it's just. I was going to just say he's burned up. So I'm just thinking he's just kind of a smoky finger, smoky ashen finger.
Oh man. Well, let's talk a little bit of language word nerdism here. You and I both looked up a couple words here. I mean, I kind of knew what it was, but I wanted to make sure we got carcanet, which is a necklace or ornamental collar, typically made of gold or set with jewels. So we're not talking about some little heart pendant that he got down at K, jewelers for $50.
Man,
this is
this is not.
This is serious. This is a one-of-a-kind original piece.
This is not some dainty little thing to hang around Liv Tyler's neck. This is a heavy
that would breaks when it falls on the floor. And
yeah, that's right.
Come on, what is that? Right. Who made this pile of junk? This is a big thing. I mean, if you do a Google image search or something for carcanet, I mean, you find big, heavy, kind of medieval Renaissance era, really thick, heavy chains with all kinds of jewels all over them. Yeah, big time. And then another word that I thought would be good for us to talk about real briefly was how it rested lightly on its wearer as a strand of flax. Most of us know flax as linen. So we're talking about something. I have a couple linen shirts. They are the most comfortable things I own. They just absolutely. They're of course a pain to iron, but that's not the point.
Yeah, that's why I don't buy them.
I know, seriously. Don't get me started. But they lay very comfortably, and that's the point. Is here's this big heavy. It looks like it's heavy, but it wears lightly, and it always clasps the neck with grace and loveliness. So it's a
good point. Yeah,
a really amazing kind of contrast there in terms of its description. So I just thought that was worth mentioning. But yeah, not
and so this
the
was,
first
just to be clear, this was something that the dwarves made for him.
Using his stuff.
So this is dwarven workmanship, which is interesting.
It's dwarven workmanship, but because it's set therein are gems uncounted from Valinor. So
right,
I don't know if
that
means...
so it could it could be maybe the gems had something to do with the power. We don't know, I guess.
Yeah, it was a carcanet of gold, so the gold could have been from either. We don't know. That could have been from Finrod's treasure, or it could have been from the dwarven from the dwarven mines. But then the gems were from Valinor, so.
Right.
It's interesting. Either way, clearly the dwarves have a tremendous metalsmithing ability.
And this shows they must have had tremendous esteem for Finrod. They gave him a name in their own language. I think that's just hitting me for the first time.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing, isn't it?
We've talked about how protective the dwarves are of their language.
Yeah.
And the fact that they gave him this name, I mean, they must have adored him.
It speaks well of him. But we also remember he was he was
so wise
too.
Yeah, that's right.
He clearly, was not one of these arrogant elves or the end all be all. I mean, he was willing to befriend these dwarves and to befriend to be a friend
men
of
later on. And men gave him a special name too.
Yep. And he'll end up doing something for a man that we'll get to that.
Oh yes.
Man, that's a moment. Sorry, spoiler alert, right? So anyway,
it's all reasons to keep listening.
That's right. We got to give you something.
That's right.
So why don't you tell us about Galadriel? Next couple paragraphs.
Yep. Galadriel, his sister, went not with him to Nargothrond, for in Doriath dwelt Celeborn, kinsman of Thingol, and there was great love between them. Therefore she remained in the hidden kingdom, and abode with Melian, and of her learned great lore and wisdom concerning Middle-earth. But Turgon remembered the city set upon a hill, Tirion the fair, with its tower and tree. And he found not what he sought, but returned to Nevrast, and sat in peace in Vinyamar by the shores of the sea. And in the next year Ulmo himself appeared to him, and bade him go forth again alone, and bade him go forth again alone into the Vale of Sirion. And Turgon went forth, and by the guidance of Ulmo he discovered the hidden vale of Tumladen in the encircling mountains, in the midst of which there was a hill of stone. Of this he spoke to none as yet, but returned once more to Nevrast, and there began in his secret councils to devise the plan of a city after the manner of Tirion upon Tuna, for which his heart yearned in exile.
Tuna.
Not Tuna. Thank you.
Dude, we worked for months to get that right. Tuna.
Sorry. It's all right. I almost could pronounce alone, so
Oh, goodness. Well, but at least you got bad. Yeah. So let's, I guess this is really two bits here. Let's talk about the Galadriel piece. First of all, it's kind of like she tells his brother, I'm not going with you. I met a boy.
Yeah.
And that's really what it is.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I can't go with you. I've got a date.
She stays with Celeborn. That's pretty sweet.
And I'm pretty sure she probably didn't tell Finrod his real name. She probably
name.
Waited until he was, She just, only referenced him as Celeborn, and so will we.
You can't just bring that up and not say it.
Yes, I can. Yes, I can. Watch me. So we're not told what lore and wisdom she learned from Melian, but clearly there's a lot of parallels, aren't there?
There really are. Yeah, I mean, if you look at just sort of Doriath here and look at what becomes Galadriel and Celeborn's realm, of course, Lothlorien in the Third Age, we all know that. It does seem to me that there are some parallels between just the two lands. In fact, there's a little passage I looked up in Lord of the Rings.
Oh, cool!
And I think I'll just read this one.
We don't get to bring that in often enough. No, please do.
No, we don't. So this is from, and I neglected to write down what chapter this is, but I'm sure it's in the chapter Lothlorien.
I'm sure it is. Yeah.
And it's Legolas speaking. He says, "It is long since any of my own folk journeyed hither, back to the land whence we wandered in ages long ago," said Legolas. But we hear that Lorien is not yet deserted, for there is a secret power here that holds evil from the land. Nevertheless, its folk are seldom seen, and maybe they dwell now deep in the woods and far from the northern border. So it's that bit about the secret power that holds evil from the land, and that sounds an awful lot like the Girdle of Melian, doesn't it?
It does, and it's all about that protective thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and yes, I've just confirmed that is from Chapter 6, Lothlorien.
Thank you very much. I'm I didn't want to be wrong about that.
What would I do without the search functionality of an ebook?
Yeah.
But yeah, that it definitely reminds me of that. I mean, Melian almost seems like a precursor to this elvish tendency to withdraw and protect with with some sort of secrecy.
Yeah.
I mean, I know she's Maya, not Elvish.
Well, that's true. Yeah,
you get the point.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a haven, it's a hideout, but it's not a source of offensive strength.
It's true.
Lothlorien's the same way. Rivendell's the same way, and it seems like that's even kind of the way the rings worked. The Elvish rings in the Third Age worked not as offensive weapons, despite how you saw Galadriel and the Hobbit going all nuclear on Sauron. They were
right.
defensive weapons.
They were I mean,
protective.
Their power was preservation.
Preservation, exactly. That's the word, and that's really what Melian's doing here. In terms of the girdle and Doriath. So.
There's also one other thing that I think Galadriel learned from Melian, and that is lembas.
Oh, she got the recipe for lembas.
I think she did. It's not mentioned here, but later on, I think it's actually in the Turin Turambar chapter.
I'm going to get myself in trouble here. So you get the ladies in the kitchen, and she says, "Can I get the recipe for that?" I mean, is that how this went down?
These aren't just any ladies.
No, I know.
And it's not just any baking.
And I'm not saying anything about women in kitchens. This is not what I'm saying.
No, we know that. We know that. We know that.
I just want to make sure there's some folk out there who may, I'm just making sure. Real clear on that one.
Thank you. No, thank you for clarifying. I think
that's what I do.
I think it's clear. I don't think you have to worry.
Good.
But yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, we learned that, the lembas is something that only a queen can keep and can give to people. So, I don't know. I think that's kind of cool.
I think it is. Oh, so sorry. Wow. Let me try that again. I think it is.
I can tell.
What was that you said? No, I'm kidding. So then we get Turgon. I love it. First of all, I guess the dream itself wasn't enough, so Ulmo actually showed up, right?
Yeah, he actually appears to him.
So you're sitting in peace by Finnimar, but I gave you a dream for a reason, pal.
Like, hey, remember dreams, portents?
Yeah. Big ones. So
I gave you portents, man.
I gave you portents and you gave me nothing. You need to go. And so he went and he found the hidden veil. Mm-hmm. Oh man, what a beautiful place. I know we're going to get to this when we get to of Tuor and the fall of Gondolin, but maybe, let's give everybody a heads up now. If you do not have Unfinished Tales, please acquire it, because before we read the chapter, or before we do the chapter on Tuor and the fall of Gondolin, which is a little ways away, we're doing chapter 13 now, and that's chapter 23. So you've got like 20 weeks
some time.
Minimum. Well, actually more than that, because some of that's Baron and Luthien in between. So we're looking at probably, you're probably looking at 6 months. So you got plenty of time. But there is a tale in there that we're going to be touching on and reading a big chunk of. So get yourself that if you haven't already.
And in fact, you know what? Let's make a point to put a link to it up on the website with the show notes for this episode.
Definitely. So he finds this gorgeous valley. It's hidden. It's secret. We'll find out just how secret later on. And I mean, it is really secret. It's super duper double secret. With probably the cones of silence over it even. I mean, it's got everything. So he gets there and he wants to build, unlike Finrod, he doesn't want to build underground. He wants to build a city that looks like Tirion. Really cool, huh?
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. Yeah.
I know there's something there. I can't quite get it. The one wants to build in a cave, one wants to build, a city like Tirion. There's something there, but I can't quite.
Well, just this idea that his heart yearned in exile.
Yeah, I think so.
I think he's just, he misses it. I'm trying, and I probably won't find it in time, but I'm trying to find during the actual flight of the Noldor, we actually see who were the ones who were kind of, looking behind them as they left, and
It was
not
Finarfin's
sure.
folk.
Oh, was it? Okay, so that wasn't Turgon. Yeah.
No.
Okay.
In fact, I think
Never mind.
wasn't Turgon in the van? The Vanguard in the.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I think he was. Yeah, because he's Fingolfin's son. He had
Right.
a bit of that.
I mean, he was
bit of
one of
that
the
going
ones
on.
who ended up accidentally.
He was kind of one of the Hawks, wasn't he?
He was accidentally involved in the kinslaying because he came up on the battle and saw people involved,
Right.
and he just jumped in. Yeah.
Well, so that's interesting.
It is.
That he just had this yearning. He missed home,
Yeah.
and so he's
build
going
a
to do
city
something.
just like home.
He's going to do something about it. He's not just going to pine for it. He's not pining for the fjords.
Oh man,
He's,
I don't know you're going there.
He's pining for the fjords. He's actually gonna build it. He's gonna build a new Tirion upon Tuna,
Yeah.
right here in Middle Earth.
Up on Tuna.
I got it right that time.
Good job. Well, now I get to butcher some language because I think I get to call something the Dagor Aglareb. Ooh, I got it right.
Oh, that was good, boy.
So we're gonna read.
Man.
We're gonna read a little bit of the next paragraph here, a couple lines in. Once more, with a little warning, his might was stirred. We're talking about Morgoth here, and suddenly there were earthquakes in the north, and fire came from fissures in the earth, and the iron mountains vomited flame, and orcs poured forth across the plain of Ardgallan. Thence they thrust down the pass of Sirion in the west, and in the east they burst through the land of Maglor, in the gap between the hills of Maedhros and the outliers of the Blue Mountains. But Fingolfin and Maedhros were not sleeping, and while others sought out the scattered bands of orcs that strayed in Beleriand and did great evil, they came upon the main host from either side, as it was assaulting Dorthonion. And they defeated the servants of Morgoth, and pursuing them across Ardgallan, destroyed them utterly, to the least and last, within sight of Angband's gates. That was the third great battle of the wars of Beleriand, and it was named Dagor Aglareb, the glorious battle.
Man, there's a line in there that just gives me chills. We'll get to it in a minute, but
Yeah. Yeah, me too. But let's look at the map first. I just realized we didn't talk about the map for Gondolin, so let's make up for that first.
oh, good point.
Going back to kind of our reference point of, say, Ithel or Ivern, since we talked about that at the beginning of the episode, go due east and a little bit north. You're looking now a little bit southeast of the island of Tol Sirion. The mountains there, kind of on the southwest corner of Dorthonion.
Big cluster of mountains
Big
there,
cluster.
really. It's-
You'll
yeah.
see Gondolin right there, kind of buried in that little valley. And just north of a word called Chrysaegrim, which will be important later. That's where the eagles end up dwelling.
Right.
But that valley, those mountains are called the Encircling Mountains, and they will protect the city of Gondolin from the spies of Morgoth for a very long time.
Yeah.
But in terms of the Dagor Aglareb here, let's take a look. So the Iron Mountains vomited flame.
It's
Go ahead.
really interesting. It just yes, you see that it is very well hemmed in by these mountains, so you can
Yeah.
see how it was hidden for so long. But
Yeah.
man, think about how close this is to Morgoth's realm.
Oh, yeah. This is
'cause,
much closer
Morgoth's
than
realm is right there
Nargothrond.
where Anfauglith Ardgallan is.
Yeah.
It's right under Morgoth's nose,
It
and he
really
doesn't
is.
see it for centuries.
Yeah. It really is cool because you look at where Menegroth is, significantly further south, and then you look
Yeah.
at Nargothrond, even further south. But he's right there, right under Morgoth's nose. So then we get the battle. So we get earthquakes in the north, fire coming from fissures in the earth, iron mountains vomiting flames. So we get, volcanoes again.
Proving that Sauron has no original ideas,
Well,
except
maybe
for the
one.
ring, I guess. Yeah.
That's true. I mean, we'll get to a lot more of him later. But so the orcs came across the plain, and then they split in kind of a pincher attack. They thrust down, the text says they thrust down the pass of Sirion in the west. So they go through or around the fen of Serek, and then down through where Tol Sirion is, and they come into Beleriand
right.
that way. And the other half of their army goes around through the land of Maglor in the gap between the hills of Maedhros and the outliers of the Blue Mountains. So That's going to be all the way over where it says Lothland, and below that, the March of Mithros.
Right.
That's going to be where they're coming through.
That space between the two spurs of the mountains that's Maglor's Gap, isn't it? It's not labeled on this map, but
no, that is Maglor's Gap. It's the gap between those hills of Mithros, which would be Himmering, and the outliers of the Blue Mountains. So where you see like Mount Rarir,
not Rarir,
yeah. But yeah, the rest of that chain. So that open land. So they come through there, and they come through on the other side, and they're assaulting Dorthonion, I suppose, then from east and west is what we find out. But Fingolfin and Mithros weren't sleeping. Well, of course not. So while everybody else is out, trying to catch these bands of orcs, they and their forces come right on the main host from either side, and they have this massive counterattack. The orcs retreat, and they end up chasing them all the way across the plains of Ardgallen, right there in front of Angband. Beautiful, utter victory. And that's
within sight of Angband's gates.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Ooh.
Yeah.
But you love that whole line, though, don't you?
I do. Yeah, the whole thing from they were not sleeping.
Yes.
I love that. That's such a great understatement. Like, it's just such a cool turn of phrase. Yeah, that whole thing I get chills.
That phrase,
I just want to stand up and cheer.
To the least and last.
To the least and last, yeah.
That's a beautiful, beautiful phrase.
Yeah, well, it's a good, well-named Dagor Aglareb, the glorious battle. It was a really, really good victory.
And it was a big victory, but what else?
But
you're going to take that, because there's always a but in there.
Because we can't have nice things. So the next paragraph here. A victory it was, and yet a warning. And the princes took heed of it, and thereafter drew closer their leaguer, and strengthened and ordered their watch, setting the siege of Angband, which lasted well nigh 400 years of the sun. For a long time after Dagor Aglareb, no servant of Morgoth would venture from his gates, for they feared the lords of the Noldor, and Fingolfin boasted that, save by treason among themselves, Morgoth could never again burst from the leaguer of the Eldar, nor come upon them at unawares. Yet the Noldor could not capture Angband, nor could they regain the Silmarils, and war never wholly ceased in all that time of the siege. For Morgoth devised new evils, and ever anon he would make trial of his enemies.
Ever and anon. I love that. There's a word here that I want to make sure we grasp, because it took me a while when I was reading this. I didn't quite get it, and that's the word leaguer. Really, what we're talking about here is their siege.
Right.
That's what this is. Drew closer their leaguer. They're talking about the siege. Same thing about that save by treason, Morgoth could never again burst from the leaguer of the Eldar. They could not break the siege, is what they're saying there. So just want to clear that up.
Yeah, that's a good one, because it is not a word that we see often anymore, except in the the compound word beleaguer, which literally, we kind of use it to mean beset with difficulties. Actually, I just found a dictionary entry for it, but it does literally mean to lay siege to. So it is that is what it comes from.
That is fascinating. I didn't even think about beleaguered, but you're right. We use that word all the time. I'm just looking at the word leaguer, and I'm thinking a minor leaguer, a major leaguer.
Right.
Not the same word. Not the same meaning, at least. I shouldn't say it is the same word. It's just not the same meaning.
Right.
Wow. A victory it was, and yet a warning. And boy, isn't that foreboding, this little line that, saved by treason, they could never burst from the...
right.
They couldn't break our siege unless we, commit treason amongst ourselves.
Right.
Like that's going to happen.
That'll never happen.
It will.
Yeah. More on that later.
Yeah, much more on that later.
Much later.
So,
but yeah, this is a siege. It's, they're going to surround him.
Yep.
But they're not going to go any further than that. They're not going to win this war.
No.
Immediately. And he is going to keep making life hard for them.
Exactly. And it's not a full siege, and that's part of the problem. If you're besieging a castle or a keep of some sort, you're going to win because you're going to keep food from getting in.
Right.
You're going to...
Because you're going to surround them on all sides if you do it right.
Exactly. Yeah. But they can't cut Morgoth off on all sides.
Right.
They're able to get, and this is, we're going to kind of get to the geography of his realm a little bit, and there's nothing on the map, so I can't point you to anything. But the text below that, and we're not going to read this entire section, but the way it works is the towers of Thangorodrim were defending the Iron Mountains. They're impassable because it's too cold, snow and ice. So behind him, up to his north, he had no foes. So he could send people out. He couldn't send out whole armies that way, but he could send out spies and small groups of orcs.
Little raiding bands and things like that. Yeah,
exactly. And just to sow, as the text says, to sow fear and disunion, one of the things he did was command these orcs to take alive any of the elves that they could and bring them to Angband. Ooh, terrifying.
Oh, and I love that. I love that. And desiring, and I love this. It's desiring to sow fear and disunion among the Eldar. He's going to create mistrust of elves among elves. Yeah,
because he knows that saved by treason, he's not going to be able to get out.
Yeah, exactly. This is one of those things. I don't want to spend too much time on this because we talk so much about the history of Middle Earth. I think the Book of Lost Tales is the one place we don't usually go because those are really much older versions of these same stories. And
true.
I think pretty much universally we can say that the Book of Lost Tales is replaced by the Silmarillion. But this is one of those things that there's a lot of in the Book of Lost Tales. The idea of Noldor being imprisoned. And being captured and then being sent out as spies. There's really a major cultural divide between elves that had been thralls and those who had not. And I don't know. That's one thing I kind of missed from the Silmarillion. I wish there was a little bit more on it here.
Yeah,
because you kind of see this. You kind of see a real just like kind of almost like a terror campaign from Morgoth.
Yeah, it really is.
Sowing fear among people, or among Noldor, I guess. Yeah. And here it's just the one sentence.
Well, we get a little bit of it later. We don't have time to talk about him now, and even if we did, it would be a spoiler alert. But there is an elf we get to spend a pretty significant amount of time with by the name of Gwyndor.
That's right.
Who was once a thrall. And we get to see kind of the response of his people when he gets back.
Yeah.
So then, again, not reading, but just kind of skimming the next paragraph, we see that 100 years after the glorious battle, there's an army that does come out of the north. They come all the way down the coasts by the route that Fingolfin followed from the grinding ice. But they were seen in time, and they got wiped out. They didn't even count among the great battles. The orcs just there weren't enough of them, and there were only a small part of the people that were fighting there. But then there was no.
And who was it who saved him? It was Fingon.
Fingon the Valiant.
Yeah.
And he'll come back again in just a little bit, won't he?
Yeah.
So there was peace after that, and no more open assault. He realized that his orcs were overmatched, big time. So then, what happens 100 years later? Well, I'll go ahead and read this. I guess this is the last. Hold on a second.
I think this is the last paragraph of
the chapter, and we can discuss this. Yeah. Hold on a second. Let me just make sure I'm in the right spot. Okay. Again, after 100 years, Glaurung, the first of the Uruloki, the fire drakes of the north, issued from Angband's gates by night. He was yet young and scarce half grown, for long and slow is the life of the dragons. But the elves fled before him to Eredwethrin and Orthonion in dismay, and he defiled the fields of Ardgallan. Then Fingon, Fingon, Prince of Hithlum, rode against him with archers on horseback, and hemmed him round with a ring of swift riders, and Glaurung could not endure their darts, being not yet come to his full armory. And he fled back to Angband, and came not forth again for many years. Fingon won great praise, and the Noldor rejoiced, for few foresaw the full meaning and threat of this new thing. But Morgoth was ill pleased that Glaurung had disclosed himself over soon, and after his defeat there was the long peace of well nigh 200 years. In all that time there were but affrays on the marches, and all Beleriand prospered and grew rich. Behind the guard of their armies in the north, the Noldor built their dwellings and their towers, and many fair things they made in those days, and poems and histories and books of lore. In many parts of the land the Noldor and the Sindar became welded into one people, and spoke the same tongue, though this difference remained between them. that the Noldor had the greater power of mind and body, and were the mightier warriors and sages, and they built with stone, and loved the hill slopes and open lands. But the Sindar had the fairer voices, and were more skilled in music, save only Maglor, son of Fëanor. And they loved the woods and the riversides, and some of the grey elves still wandered far and wide, without settled abode, and they sang as they went.
Wow, so a lot going on here. We've got
a lot,
so,
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so I guess let's go back to the beginning. We start with Glaurung, the appearance of Glaurung, the first dragon.
And not just the dragon, the Uruloki.
The Uruloki. That's a beautiful word.
Isn't it?
For something horrible.
For something terrifying, yeah. Now, he's not a flying dragon. That's
correct.
Yeah. Otherwise, the archers might not have bothered him very much, right?
Right. Yeah, we will see winged dragons later in the Silmarillion, but it'll be a while.
Including one fairly large one, who's not anywhere near as large as some of the internet drawings render him to be. But
I know some of the drawings you're thinking of, yeah.
I know the dragon of which you think. Fingon the Valiant shows up again. I love that guy. Again. Yeah.
And where would we be without Fingon? I mean,
well, where would Maedhros be without
Fingon?
Well,
I know where he'd be.
He'd still be hanging out with Morgoth.
To a mountain.
He'd be you missed the chance. He'd still be hanging out with Morgoth.
Oh man,
boom.
Man, that's good.
Too soon?
He'd have two hands though.
Yes,
there's that.
There would be that.
Wouldn't really have access to one of them though.
Not particularly. He wouldn't be able to wield his sword in that hand, that's for sure.
No.
But that's okay, because now he is left-handed. I have a surprise for you. I am now left-handed. Which meant he probably was not one of the archers on horseback. It might be awfully difficult to work a bow without a hand. I'm sure it's possible, but
maybe if he had a hook or something, but I don't know. Could you even draw?
Smee, we're trying to get Glaurung here. Smee, will you help me?
Wow, you just dropped a Captain Hook voice in here. I don't know. Could you even draw a bowstring with a hook? I don't know. I'm getting off topic.
I know, and it's not really. I'm sure that
it doesn't matter.
I mean, I'm sure that somebody can inform us that that there is a way these days with prosthetics and
probably
for folks who have various disabilities or limb missing limbs that can do many things.
Yeah,
it's pretty amazing. I've actually have a dear family friend whose child has a missing limb, and I've seen her do some things that it's like, how did you just do that?
Wow, that's awesome.
It's really cool to see. It's amazing what people can do when they have to. And so I'm sure Fingon might have figured it out.
And now it's my turn to apologize and clarify that I'm not.
I know you're not.
Not attempting any kind of offense to anybody out there. Just having a little fun at Maedhros' expense.
Exactly. It's all just fun and games. But the Captain Hook thing we had to dial that in. That was too fun.
Yeah.
So Fingon but then you get this crazy foreboding sentence again. Few foresaw the full meaning and threat of this new thing. Really? You just saw this big, giant creature that was defiling the fields.
Yeah.
Destructive, still nowhere near his full power. But, that's all right. We beat him.
And then you beat it, and then you're just like, oh, yeah, we did it. You're not
turned around. He's never going to come back.
Right.
Really? Is he?
Or just the thought that he's come up with this thing. I mean, that's
pretty scary.
This is an ultimate weapon at this point.
It is. This is, and boy, is Morgoth unhappy that it was revealed too soon.
Yeah.
Wow.
Morgoth
was
really cool.
Pleased.
Oh, I think somebody probably lost his life over that.
Exactly. Who was responsible for watching Glaurung?
Right. Which orc let him out of his cage? Who let the dragons out? Who? Oh man.
Yeah. I'm just going to leave that right there.
Yeah.
But yeah, Morgoth is ill-pleased. That's not a guy you want to have be ill-pleased.
No.
If he's
not at all.
If you're around him. So like you said earlier, this is about as good as it's going to get, right? I mean, we get the 200 years peace after this. Now, that means that we're looking at a total of 400 years, because you had 100 years between the Dagor Aglareb and that army up in the north that got wiped out, and then 100 more years for Glaurung, and now we have 200 years of peace. So you'll end up, so you'll end up with a total of 400 years from the Dagor Aglareb.
Yep, right.
To the next thing that happens.
Right.
But I love this. Beleriand prospered. They grew rich.
Oh, yeah.
They built their dwellings. It's awesome. It's all good.
It's about as good as it's going to get for them for a long time.
Yeah, it really is.
They've got... Yeah, I like the kinship that they've got here. This idea of them being welded into one people. I love that.
That's a cool word. That's a really powerful word. I love how he, again, the word choice is no accident. And merge would have been a weaker word. I think welded is this idea of permanence to it.
For sure.
Permanence,
and I like
yet
the fact that he points out that they spoke. What was that? I'm sorry.
I was saying permanent, but still two separate things. I mean, if you weld two pieces of steel together, one at one angle, one at another, you can tell which one's which.
You can see where you're right. Yeah,
merged,
that's true.
You can't when two things merge, they become one, and you can't really tell where the one was.
You can't tell where one ends and the other begins. Yeah.
But in this case, you still have, they're welded. It's a stronger word, certainly. Welded. There's a permanency to that, isn't there?
Oh yeah. And I like that he points out that they spoke the same tongue. There's that idea of the shared language, the shared culture again. I think that's really nice.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And the difference between the Noldor and Sindar we get to see. The Noldor, a little bit, they're stronger, a little bit smarter. Well, we know that. They're better at languages.
Yes.
They build with stone, so they build, structures we kind of recognize. The Sindar love to live in the woods and by the sides of the river. And apparently some of them just don't even want to live anywhere. They're nomads. They far and wide without settled abode. And of course, they have the fairer voices and are more skilled in music. Beautiful thought.
Yeah. And I kind of read between the lines here that because they're welded as one people, you can see them using their own gifts. Each of them sort of enriching the culture in their own way. I mean, it's not said here, but I think you could probably speculate that's what's going on with the Noldor with their their skill of mind and their strong bodies, and the Sindar with their with their art, art, music,
absolutely.
Some of these things that give beauty to life.
Yeah, that make it worth living. And I love this, that, this is when all the poems and histories and books of lore were made.
Oh, yeah.
Many fair things. In a way, I'm sure we're reading some of that, in the sense that some of the poems and stories that we read of the times prior to this would have been written during this time. 400 years of peace.
Probably some of the things like, Maglor's, Noldolante and things like that that I guess we can't read because
exactly.
Yeah,
because
it's not around. But
wouldn't that be a piece to read? Well, wonderful chapter. But I think that actually does wrap it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony podcast.
I think so.
As always, we thank you very much for joining us, especially tonight. You had to be really patient with us.
And join us again next time when we knew this day was coming, Alan.
Yeah.
We're about to get to chapter 14 of Beleriand and its realms.
Yeah, that is a bit of a challenge for us, isn't it? Sean and I made a couple of jokes about how dry it is in the past, but it is truly very important because it defines all the elven realms of Beleriand, and that's a key to understanding the later battles and alliances. We promise to make it as interesting as we possibly can. That just means we'll probably tell a lot of really bad jokes.
Yes.
Plenty of those, and maybe a whole lot of pop culture references too.
Yeah, we'll do our best. Yes, whatever we can to punch it up a little bit. I mean, I agree. It is very important. It's good stuff to have. So dive in. Try to focus on the people who rules where. Those are at least are names you've seen before.
Exactly.
Keep your map handy. There's one right there in the chapter. If you're using our edition, it's opposite page 120. And then there's also, of course, the loaderproject.com map, which we've been talking about. And as I said before, you'll now find a link from our website.
Yep. And don't forget, if you need cheap paperbacks to read and mark up and put notes in, you can use the links on our library page at theprancingponypodcast.com. We also still have links to audiobooks, music CDs, the J.R.R. Tolkien audio collection, which is amazing, and some other cool things for your Tolkien collection.
Yep, and if you haven't done so already, please subscribe on iTunes or Google Play Music. We need your reviews, so please leave one if you haven't. We'd greatly appreciate your support.
Yep. And social media is a great place to share our podcast as well. Retweet us, share us, tell your friends. And one last thing as always, don't forget to send your questions, comments, or suggestions on how to train your dragon to the prancingponypodcast@gmail.com, and we'll try to get them into our next episode. Well, as always, an hour 40 is still far too short a time to spend among such admirable listeners. But until next time.
Farewell, friends.